Right. Okay. Well, let's get started. So my name is Greg Kaminsky. Thanks for coming today. So this is our session on remote teaching, reflection, and planning. And my background, I work with online learning, and I also teach a reading class. And I'm going to turn it over right away to Linda to continue and open it up.
Hi, everyone. So nice to see everybody here and to see your names and your faces and your willingness to join us for some reflection and hopefully leading to some planning. My name is Linda Fergusson-Kolmes. I teach biology. I'm also the Sylvania Teaching Learning Center Coordinator. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And I just want to acknowledge on this particular day, some of you who are also involved in STEM may have received the notice that there was a STEM strike called today to affirm that Black Lives Matter and to take a pause in academia to spend some time learning and educating ourselves about anti-racist actions and being anti-racist educators. And I just want to commit to doing that work today and all the other days. And this will be part of my process and thinking about how to include students and center students who've been marginalized, especially by racism. So the reflections today for me personally, and I know probably for many others, are going to be really centered in the context of today. What just happened? We are at the end of a term where we had 10 days to jump into remote teaching, and the experience was probably different for different reasons for all of us. Some of us had lots of experience with D2L, some of us didn't. We teach different disciplines, the challenges are different, and the context of our personal lives was different for doing this. And so as we find ourselves in finals week and that evidence of student learning is coming across our inboxes, and doubtless lots of grading is still happening, it seemed a good time to reflect. What worked? What didn't? What questions do I have? And to take a moment to learn from each other and to take that learning and turn it into planning, because apparently we get to do this again summer term and fall term. So I just want to thank everyone for being here and for being willing to share your wisdom, because I know I still have lots of questions and lots to learn. And so with that, I'm going to introduce our panelists and then turn it over to Greg. Joining us today, stepping away from their grading or their other responsibilities, are Magda Morris from Dental Assisting, Daniel Soucy from Graphic Design, Sarah Bentley from Spanish, myself from Biology, Katie Standish from Chemistry, Megan Savage from English, Deb Lippoldt from Foods and Nutrition. And since they didn't get a chance to share their pronouns, just in case you don't know, one way to let your students do that is you can click on the participants button. And when your name shows up, if you click on your own name, you're given the option to rename yourself, as I have done. And you can include your pronouns if you so choose. And so, Greg, what are you going to ask our panelists today?
Yeah, so here are the guiding prompts that we've given to the panelists, and they will be addressing any or all of these questions. How did things go during the transition to remote teaching term? How was student learning impacted? How did it go in terms of reaching all students? So keeping them on board. Share a key lesson learned. So something, for example, something that didn't work, and maybe a key strategy or a tip learned along the way. So we are going to get right into it. Each of the panelists will have 5 minutes, and I will need to to watch that carefully so we go along as we go along. And feel free to type questions into the chat area. We will not have time during this session to address all questions, but try to get to some of them, and you'll be able to ask questions later on during the breakout rooms as well. So at about 20 to 2, we'll shift over to the breakout rooms, and you'll have a chance to visit at least one of the breakout rooms, one of the instructors. So with that in mind, let's turn it over to Magda.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity to share the little bit I know with you. So it's been pretty challenging for everyone, right? But there are also a lot of opportunities by having to go online that I found. So this term, we in dental assisting did not teach online. We had to convert the last 2 weeks of winter term to online, which was interesting. And then at the same time, we're working on the new dental assistant online program. So we were lucky because we were working on getting trained with the foot and the OIO training for online. And so that was very timely. So what we've been doing this spring, which is actually our summer, we have been working on the templates for the online learning and the classes that we were supposed to teach in winter that we're teaching now. So some of the things that I really appreciate about going online is that students have the flexibility to do to take a test, to study at their own term, and I think they like that quite a bit. We still set parameters as far as, you know, when to take a test, because we want to make sure that they're not taking too long before they come in for their competencies. But you can imagine that we moved a program that it's, you know, we see patients, and we had to figure out ways to make sure that the students were getting what they needed for their competencies and showing us how to do it. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to deliver products to the students. They're actually going to work with typodonts, which are little jaws on a stand, and they're going to film themselves doing the procedure that that we would have had them do face to face. So it's going to be interesting to watch all the videos and make sure that they're competent. And then at the last, we got an exception. So the last 5 weeks of the term, they will be allowed to go to their externship sites. So we're hoping to at least graduate the dental assistant cohort. Hygiene is another problem that we still have to deal with, but you know, we've been innovative. Zoom has been great, and you know, the D2L platform I think it's awesome now compared to what we started with when I first started using it, because we used it a little bit for our classes, but it was like a hybrid, and now it's going to be mostly online. The challenges for me is if you have about 50 students and you have to grade a lot of discussions, that's a problem. So if you're having to go with discussions, make it so that, you know, it can be meaningful, but you're not going to have that much work when you're assessing the students. You know, it's just setting up. It takes a little while for your quizzes and your tests, but once you have the questions library is really good and easy to change things around.
Thank you, Magda. So Daniel, would you like to go ahead and share your perspective?
Okay, so let's see. So I teach graphic design. I would say the transition was challenging, but luckily it happened at a time that I was teaching a software class, so it was manageable. So, you know, instead of teaching some of the hands-on classes, most of it was, you know, sharing screens anyway. So that was good that I didn't have to tweak you know, my lesson plans too much. However, there were some challenges when it comes to something, you know, that we take for granted, such as being able to walk and talk as opposed to chalk and talk, right? So I'm someone who likes to pace. I'm someone who likes to walk around class, look over people's shoulders, have something up on the screen, but also, you know, make an analogy, gesture with my hands, and whatnot, show things. And that, a lot of that had to adapt, right? I'm sure all of us are realizing that talking with hands are up here next to our face now, instead of, you know, down where our natural hands should be. So being able to, you know, adapt to some of that was a little bit challenging. I will say that something I did to help ease the transition was I didn't plan ahead too much, and I decided to remain flexible. So instead of planning out my whole term, and you know, again, I understand the privilege of being able to do that with the classes I was teaching this term, it allowed me to start to see what worked. And more importantly, see what didn't work for the students and adapt the second half of my class to make it better. So it almost felt like every class was just getting better and better, and we were feeling more comfortable in there. Student learning impacted and how to go in terms of reaching students. So I weighed out the idea of making it fully accessible and treating it as a more of an online course where everything was recorded and that students could come in asynchronously. But I also decided that for the sake of anxiety, especially with a graphic design class, it would be more important to kind of create that normalcy or keep that normalcy of meeting at a normal time. And so we set up a class very similar to my class in person, but I shortened down the lectures. I made sure to record and post lectures, and also remain during work time, so where I was available. So that allowed me to kind of bring in some more of those ideas of that I would get in class, of walking around and be able to sit over your shoulder and answer questions. What was really nice about that is it allowed students to, when they did have a question, share their screen. And so I could use pretty much every question as a teaching moment to the whole class, as opposed to one, you know, a one-on-one type of thing. That was a little scary for students at first, you know, especially the students that tend to be a little bit more shy. But I did notice by the end of the term, those students that are more traditionally shy were the ones who were sharing their screens more, and realizing that, you know, asking the questions and having that permission was part of it. So I did have to make sure to kind of reiterate the permissions, right? There is no dumb questions. It's okay to ask questions. This is what we're here for. You know, give them the permission to meet with me. It's something I've always done in my class anyways, to create that comfort, and let them know that asking questions is what keeps me in a job, so that the more they ask, the more that, you know, I'm going to be here. So they don't need to apologize for a question anymore. And that really helped with this. Also knowing that it may not work for everyone, right? And I let them know that I would be flexible and work with them outside of class if they couldn't make it because of job, you know, or family needs or whatnot. And so there were a few times that I had to redo a lesson, or meet with someone outside of class, or luckily I was teaching 2 of the same classes. So there were a few times that I'd just say, come to the other section. I'll send you an invite to that one. And so they could get the lesson again. Key lesson learned, something that didn't work. I would say, other than the, you know, I guess this is a good one. Every choice that I made couldn't work for everybody. And that was something I had to realize, is that it's hard in this virtual realm to be able to, you know, have a student grab you and pull you aside and ask a question. Everything is more formal. We have to send invites and things like that. And so I found a lot of them were not giving me feedback until the end of the term. And what was great is I got a lot of feedback in this last week of like, hey, could you record the whole class as opposed to just the new lecture? There are a lot of questions that we didn't get. Or you know, is there a way to create some sort of chat or something like that where we can ask questions, you know, outside of class, as opposed to just through an email. So again, thinking that you're reaching everybody, there's always going to be those students that it's not working for them, and it's worth your time to check in with them, get those critiques, and adapt your class moving forward.
Danny,
and then
just a final minute, just a
yep,
1
cool.
minute check here.
You got it. And the key strategy and tip: use the software that you guys have and all these different avenues. So we have a cohort model where we really push students to help one another. And I found out during the classes, seeing them, getting better and better, that they were putting together Google Docs of checklists for projects to where they'll all use it. They were taking screenshots as I was showing things and putting them into those Google Docs. And when I realized that, I would pause a little bit longer and say, all right, it's screenshot time. Take a screenshot of this menu or whatnot to put in those docs. But they're also doing things like having their own Zoom meetings. I think the students meet for a happy hour every Thursday night. And then Saturday and Sunday, they do open lab time, which is something we normally have in class. They're taking it upon themselves to help one another. So, anything you can do to remind them that, hey, there's Google Docs, there's Google Meet, this is how we use it. Those things go a long way into helping with that engagement, right? Getting them to have that buy-in where they're teaching one another as well. So that's what I have. I'm happy to answer more questions. One last thing I'd say before closing is in part 2, where we're going over like our D2L Brightspace. I'm gonna actually show my Google website instead, which is something we use. So if you're interested in learning about that aspect or a different avenue, I'm happy to share that with you as well. And take it away.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Daniel. Appreciate that. So let's move on to Sarah.
Unmuted. Hi, everybody. So prior to, let's see, what was it, March 15th, I had no idea where D2L was. I had never signed into D2L before. In Spanish, we very staunchly have opposed all kinds of online learning because we really believe that the face-to-face communication aspect is so important. So this was a major pivot for all of us. So the transition was pretty brutal, but we made it. We do use a very robust textbook platform. So our textbook platform has a video recording capability, which has been really helpful in terms of hearing students speaking. They're able to connect with one another on the textbook platform. So that's what we had relied on prior to this. So incorporating D2L with our textbook platform was a bit of a challenge. I was really lucky, fortunate, because I was teaching 2 classes of the same thing, and it was a cohort model. So this was an end of sequence course. So I had already had relationships with 25 out of my 30 students. And that made a huge difference. I think primarily because of that, because we already had a relationship. They all but one of them passed. They all did very well in the course, and they all attended. And they learned the grammar, which was surprising. I feel sad about the lacking of sort of holistic communicative proficiency that they probably missed out on because they didn't have those hours of practicing speaking and listening that they would have in a classroom environment. But they met the objectives for the course, and I guess that's all we had to aim for at this point. And I was also really impressed with how much initiative they took on their own to learn these concepts. We were together. The way I structured it was that I asked them to attend 1 session a week. And originally I set the sessions to be only 30 minutes, sort of 30 to 40 minutes long. And within the first 2 weeks, it was very clear that they wanted those to last at least an hour. So I continued teaching for an hour. We don't lecture in language classes. We explain a concept for maybe 10 minutes, and then the rest of the class is them in breakout sessions practicing with one another, me jumping around and bringing everyone together and overseeing their practice of it all. So they very quickly asked for more time together, which was surprising. I was reluctant in the beginning to offer or to require so much synchronous work because for many reasons, but it turns out that was something they were asking me for. So I offered it, and similar to Daniel, teaching 2 of the same thing, I allowed them to come to any session. I said, just come one time. I don't care if it's on Monday or Thursday, just come once. And that was really helpful. In fact, not a single student missed the minimum requirement of attendance. So I was delighted and surprised by that, frankly. Let's see, what else was on my list here? They, as far as some lessons learned, I was expecting the students to toggle between both of our platforms, between D2L and our textbook platform, and that just wasn't happening as much as I was expecting. I structured it to list all their tasks in D2L, and then I wanted them to go over to the textbook platform to complete the homework, and they were going straight to the textbook platform and not checking into D2L in the beginning as much as I told them to do that. So I, going forward, need to figure out how to streamline that better. I'm still working on that one. And they also, I used VoiceThread, which is a video, I guess you could say, what, a video discussion board. And I did not explicitly require them to listen to and respond to one another's posts, and so they didn't. And that was another lesson learned, that they're busy, they're not going to go in and do that unless it's required. So that felt a little bit like a, I don't know, it felt underwhelming. I was expecting the VoiceThread experience to be more interactive and engaging and community building, and it wasn't. And so I need to think about if I'm going to require that. And they also struggled with the VoiceThread because it was yet one more link to click through. It was embedded within D2L, but then it took them to another spot and they had a hard time going back to it. So as far as logistics, that was a little challenging. I also struggled with all the little extra bells and whistles that I had posted and hoping they would interface with them, and they just didn't. However, a few more things I learned. 1 minute left. Okay, turn off your private chat. I had an issue where students were privately chatting with one another, and that was causing some issues. So we cut that off. I didn't know I had to do that. That was an important lesson. I'd say the most important thing I did was I assigned partners. So they had a requirement to interact with a partner once a week and record a video and send it to me. And I was nervous that they would have trouble coordinating. It was great. They loved it. That seemed to be the glue that connected our class, because they had different people every class, and they didn't have any problem scheduling, and they used that as a homework partner. They reported to have been talking for longer than my required 10-minute assignment. So I was really happy with that. And I was also really flexible with backup plans, right? So if you couldn't get the textbook platform to record your video, do it in Zoom, do it in FaceTime, whatever. And that seemed to be really good.
Thank you, Sarah. I think we're going to have to stop there. Sorry about that. Thank you very much. It's really helpful to learn about that. And let's move on to Linda.
Hi, everyone. And I'm going to share one of the things I learned was that the cognitive load of this platform, just the toll on your body and your brain and your eyes, means that I'm going to ask you, as you are able, to all take a moment, and if you wish, stand up, stretch your hands, shut your eyes, do a shoulder roll, just do something to relieve the stress on your body and on your eyes. Take a few of my precious seconds to say a little self-care here, because I don't know about you, but there is a really special headache that you get from too many hours of Zoom. That's one of the things I learned, so please do that. The transition for me was exhausting and really exciting all at the same time. Sarah mentioned that in Spanish, they had really resisted doing certain things online. And for biology, we had been staunchly against moving labs online. And all of a sudden, I needed 10. So I took a kind of a value added approach. I figured I'm in this. I'm just going to jump. Because my experience was I have turned on D2L. I had done a little bit with online quizzes. I kind of navigated my way through the grade book, and everything else I was pretty much a newbie. So I decided intentionally to try and take a value added approach, that rather than trying to replicate the face-to-face experience, I would say, what parts of biology can I expose you to that really would be like this, like big data sets, animal tracking data, where if you were in that field, you really, really would be sitting at a computer looking at the track of a great white shark or something like that. So I tried that. I tried jumping in very nervously to using a lot of different animation platforms. I used one for the anatomy and physiology section. I was really, really nervous about this. I don't know about you, but when we went remote, my inbox exploded with ads from companies saying, try our software for free. And you just know where that's gonna go. And it was unending. And I tried a few and learned a lot, but I was really, really nervous about the access for my students and what barriers that might result. Like, can you use it on a phone? What's the bandwidth issues? Are there going to be operating system issues? And so we did some things where if I was going to try something new, I put they could work in teams. We accessed the software together in breakout groups. So I could go from one team to the other to make sure, can you get on? Can you see it? I had a backup ready in case they just couldn't access the software. And that worked. And then what didn't work were the things that I had tested like 3 years in a row. I thought, this one's going to be no problem. Those were the ones where they were emailing me going, it won't download. I can't open this. What do I do? Or the link's broken. So that was good, bad, indifferent, all of those things. The things I found, I wasn't reaching all of my students equally. That became really clear. I did some wellness check-ins, mostly like, is the software working? What's the workload like? And how are you? And they were amazingly frank with how they were, and I learned a lot about the struggles and the challenges they were having. And we together did some work to figure out what the workload needed to be, because they shared with me, everyone's having us write 6 things a week. It's not just you who aren't doing midterms. My chemistry professor, it's everyone's doing this, and I'm dying here. So we did a lot of co-constructing of what that looked like. Challenges, as I think Daniel's comment about clarity, I've always done choice in this particular class. Like, I really want it to be their project and follow their passion. And I found in the online environment, they needed more structure and more clarity, and anything that wasn't really pathway, I found I had to build more structure than I would have otherwise. Sylvia asked if I did the wellness checks publicly. No, these were private, one-on-one, and I followed up with them. And they were not required to answer. But I mostly wanted to know if the format was working, what they needed from me. So I had students working synchronously and asynchronously. Final comment, what I really liked for this were the permission to change the rules. Do I really need midterms? What I really want some help with, I found other ways to assess the learning, and I really needed help doing that authentically and cutting down the grading load. And I really need to be able to reach those students who stop coming. I lost voices.
Thank you for sharing. And your background is beautiful. That is a way to relax right there, I see. So we're going to move on to our final 3 panelists who also teach online. So Katie, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, so that is actually part of the transition for me that made it interesting, is that I've been teaching chemistry online for 4 years now, if I did the math right. And so although I was teaching this term a class that our campus at least has never had online, I looked at it as kind of an exciting way to make it online. The big thing that was different is that when I teach online, we have students order lab kits. And so they get chemicals sent to their home and instruments that they play with that we didn't have available for this class this term. So I had to really adjust the labs But I think the biggest challenge for me in adjusting to remote was figuring out ahead of time how I was going to do it. And that more so meant figuring out what I thought I could handle. I have 3 kids and a full-time partner that we were trying to juggle everything. And I realized that a lot of my students might have the same situation. So I just legitimately felt like I couldn't do regular synchronous meetings and be able to be engaged and not distracted and whatever. So I decided to make my class all asynchronous. And that actually plays into how student learning was impacted and how it went in terms of reaching all students, because I didn't plan ahead to require them to. I had many office hours, 4 times a week I was online, 4 days a week, I should say. But I very rarely saw students, and I was seeing the same students over and over. And I think going into summer, I may require that a little more just to see them face to face. And so, yeah, I felt like I definitely did lose some voices. Even students doing check-ins, you wouldn't always respond, you know. But a key lesson I learned that, and this is kind of just a more general thing, was that approach of approaching a remote class as an opportunity to teach an online class was fine for me, but it didn't take into account that that's not what my students were planning. And so that was a real mental shift that I had to do, which was, you know, I was excited, like, hey, I've been doing this and here we're going to do this. It's going to be fine. And I think that may have inspired some confidence in my students that at least I know the platform a little bit. But also I couldn't just treat it like they were planning to be in an online class, because they weren't. So I had to kind of adjust my expectations there as far as what I expected out of them and the amount of interaction I expected from them. And I did have a few students early in the term that emailed me and they're like, this is terrible. I can't learn this way. I don't know what to do about it, you know, and we tried to work through it. And at least one case that I'm thinking of did get better with a little bit of help towards the organization side of it. But so that was a key lesson that I learned, was that my approach had to be more from the student's perspective than my perspective necessarily. And I find kind of interesting that my strategy, or a tip that I learned, is almost the opposite of what you said, Daniel. For me, I had to plan out my whole term, which I normally don't do. I'm normally more flexible, and I take, okay, we didn't get that far this week, so we're going to have to catch up next week. But since I was doing recorded lectures every week, I felt that it was like week 3 or something that I sat down and I said, if I do not plan this out and know exactly which lectures are going to appear which week, I'm going to feel just really disjointed and really worried every term that my assignments won't match up and everything won't match up. So I made a big schedule early on with all the assignments, all of the quizzes, what they would cover, what the test would cover, when I would post the videos. And that helped me a lot, just to know what was coming up. And yeah, I don't know. I'm really grateful to hear from all what you guys are doing too. So
Thank you, Katie. So we will move on to Megan, right? Okay, take it away, Megan.
I teach in the English SAC, and I have taught remote, online, face-to-face, all kinds of modalities, and I was a hybrid mentor last year, and I'm so glad I was, because this term I taught children's lit online, but I also taught fiction writing online, and that's what I'm going to talk about more, because that was a remote course, meaning we have made a conscious decision in our SAC not to have creative writing courses be taught online, because there's so much that goes into sort of creating a safe and effective space and a community that students can really respond critically to each other's writing and feel comfortable sharing their work. So to me, what was really new about this experience was incorporating synchronous Zoom and really learning how to kind of navigate that aspect of my class. And I did think of it in some ways more like a hybrid class. I had basically I surveyed my students at the beginning of the term, and I spent a lot of time being very explicit about how I was going to I had a lot of experience online, so don't worry, they were in good hands, but I was going going to ask them a lot of questions early on in order to shape the experience around their needs and their technology capabilities and all of that. And I sent out a survey before the term even started about what was going on in their lives, if COVID was affecting them economically, their families, if they were sharing computers with other people, if they could make a synchronous session. And what I ended up with, they did like a two-phase survey, did that, got responses, and then once the term started, it turned out they all wanted some synchronous time, so I gave them 3 or 4 options, and we landed on twice a week 1-hour meetings, and it's usually face-to-face, it would be twice a week, 2-hour meetings, but they wanted that kind of regular check-in time, and that was really great. My goal was to have a space for them to connect. Fortunately, I had put a lot of my content online. I've been teaching this course for 15 years. So it was more like I always have so much stuff to do face-to-face. I always run out of time. So this was really about rethinking how my students navigate the material. And I had already transitioned my online site from kind of assignment module, readings module to weekly modules. So this was about thinking about how I could facilitate students navigating those modules in more of a guided learning way. And yeah, so I lost about half of my students. That was really hard. It was a real half and half experience for me over the course of the term. The half that stayed in the class totally thrived, and they were showing up at Zoom sessions, and I really used breakout rooms to facilitate connection. One of my tips is to create cohorts earlier on and really use those breakout rooms in order to create that kind of learning community with each other. But about half of them didn't make it, and I did a lot in terms of reaching out, in terms of working with care, in terms of like having those conversations with students. And I think one thing that I would change next time around is I might really try to do phone conferences or video conferences within that first week with each individual student, just to really even earlier on kind of establish some of that one-on-one connection, because that was something that was challenging as we went through the term. Let's see. I think that less content is something that I wanted to work on. So one of the things that I did was I have weekly reflections, and I give students maybe like 6 questions to choose from. So we were talking about choice. So they could pick maybe 3 of the questions that were most interesting to them to talk about the readings or to talk about their own creative writing. So there was an aspect of choice, but they knew they were doing the same sort of structure of the assignment every week, but what they talked about was what they were interested in. And then I responded with audio responses so that I could talk to them more personally. And my students really appreciated that. And it was something that made me feel like I had more of that kind of interpersonal connection with my students, which was kind of my guiding principle for myself this term. How do we create connection in a time of distance beyond anything else? And I see I'm running out of time, so come chat with me and we'll talk about it more.
Thank you, Megan. Appreciate that sharing. All right, Deb, go ahead, take it away.
Okay, hi everybody. I just wanted to say, whew, congratulations. I'm so impressed. Yeah, you all deserve a huge hand. I started here, this is the end of my 6th year. And when I was hired, I knew that I was going to be doing online instruction after getting through the training. So it was actually a good time for me. We were in that transition when not everybody had D2L shells, even if they had face-to-face classes, but I figured, well, I'm gonna have to learn this anyway. So I started that first term at least creating my course shell for face-to-face using D2L. And so I guess, step back for a second, I sort of had sort of an opposite immersion, and I feel really lucky this term. I did not have to, I wasn't teaching anything remotely. All my classes had been scheduled online, and that's what students had expected. However, it's been some interesting, so I guess the things that I'm really much more aware of this term was less about my students adapting to anything in the online environment, but just how much the rest of life around them was affecting them. And so my experience this term was really focused on much more how to support their own challenges, how to be more flexible in what I was doing and expecting, and making room for them to have to look at how to do it a little differently than what I might have had in mind, or on a time frame that I had in mind. I also use care and concern a lot more this term, but had a lot of students really willing to engage and wanted some extra support. So I was really appreciative of how brave and willing they were to say, look, I need help right now. And so so those were really good lessons for me, just to learn in that way. And I'm just going to keep this short and just say, if the two things that I thought I would share in the breakout, if you're interested in, I've been using VoiceThread for one very particular project in one of my courses, and I'm going to share an example of that. And then I also have an interactive activity that was created by one of the folks in the online support who just did a great example that I was going to share as well. So I'm going to leave it there.
All right. Thank you very much, Deb. Okay. Okay. So we are off to the breakout rooms. I have everyone who's been listed, actually who has selected a room to begin in. I have you ready to go. So in just a minute, I'm going to open up the rooms, and all of you will go to the assigned room. If I made a mistake, or when ready to change, if you'd like to go to a different room, feel free to just leave the room and come back to the main room and let me know where you'd like to go, and I'll get you on to a different room. Some of the panelists may need to leave at 2, but others have volunteered to stay longer, so till 2:15. I leave that up to them. So you have a little bit more than the 10, 13 minutes that we have left here. Okay, and if you didn't get assigned a room, you can still let me know in the chat later where you'd like to go. Okay, here we go.
And since we won't be coming back together, I'd just like to thank everyone and wish you a very, very good end of term week. Thanks for joining us. Let's chat more.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you for coming. I won't see you again unless you pass through the main room. I'd like to do this again sometime, maybe a little more time for it. More time for questions would be nice. More of a discussion. I appreciate that. But you have some good discussion in the breakout room, I'm sure. So thank you. And here you go.